Hello and welcome to the Jo's Art History Podcast, a podcast which celebrates all things art historical. My name is Jo McLaughlin and I'm your host and your resident art historian here on the podcast. It's just going to be me today, and I'm going to be talking to you about an idea that I had that I originally started as an article which I wrote for somewhere called Art Browser TV back in June of 2021. And when I shared the article around a little bit, I got a lot of traction, a lot of good engagement, and more importantly, it really hit home with a lot of people. So I thought I would turn of what I wrote into the contents of a podcast episode, so I hope you enjoy it. And today I'm going to be talking to you about 3 reasons the art world is intimidating and what you can do to overcome it. Now, why this subject is particularly important to me is I didn't grow up visiting museums and galleries. Actually, I didn't even think galleries were a real thing, to be perfectly honest with you. And yeah, I was totally oblivious of their existence until I began studying art history. I just didn't think you could walk into a store and purchase art. It wasn't how I was brought up. And really, I think the handful of times I've visited museums as a child, it was on a school trip, which is absolutely fine. Not everyone's parents enjoy going to museums. Now, I did grow up in a small town called Coatbridge in Scotland, and there is an industrial museum which is there because that whole part of the central belt of Scotland was very big in mining and steel production, particularly my town. Mining was a very big thing in my town, so heyday has long since passed, but we did have an industrial museum which we did go to religiously, either via school or on the weekends if my mum was just looking to sort of run us around a little bit and get a little and tire us out, which was great, and I really enjoyed that, but there wasn't any art there. So I didn't really go into big intimidating buildings or know that you could just walk off the street and that there's art for sale. That just really wasn't a concept for me. And why would that be on a radar of a small child? Of course it wouldn't be. And since working or becoming an art historian and studying art history, I do remember the first time I went to the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery when I was studying art history, and I found the building very grand facade, very intimidating. And to be perfectly honest with you, the proportions of the door size to the building size were completely off whack. The door is tiny that you get in, particularly if you go around the what is now the front of the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery. It's just a little set of stairs and 3 sort of turnstile doors. Whereas the back of the Kelvin Grove, which was actually the front because it used to be someone's home, is this grand staircase. Anyway, not important. However, I do remember feeling very intimidated, and when I walked into the space feeling like, wow, this is unbelievable. And then I didn't really know what to do with myself once I was in there. I was kind of like, is there a route that you follow? Do I speak to someone? Is there tours? What happens? And I very quickly just realised, you just sort of do your own thing. And then when it came to working in the art world, I really didn't actually step into independent galleries until I was studying my master's. So that really wasn't very long ago. That was 2014, 2015. So really not very long ago. And it's really, really intimidating. If you're listening to this and you've never gone into a big private art gallery, particularly I think one of the first galleries I visited when I got to London was White Cube. And the door is humongous, and I don't even think I was strong enough to open it. I think my friend had to also help me open it. But it was strange because it was a huge big door like a bank. There was tinted windows. I've been to galleries where you actually physically have to buzz yourself in, which is even more terrifying because you're like, I can't afford these things. Why? Oh my gosh, I'm wasting everybody's time. And also, it doesn't really make you feel at home if you think about it. If your entry into a building is difficult and staggered and slightly complicated and you have to jump through hoops even just to get through the door, you're not going to feel at home. And the art world can seem like a strange and intimidating place to navigate, and there's several reasons for that. And really, I started thinking about, how did I start to feel less intimidated, or how can you rephrase your thinking to make these places less intimidating? And I broke it down into 3 key points within this article that I'd written, and really what you can do to overcome them. So I hope you enjoy. So, reason 1, the buildings. This is a big one in the art world, and it's the first real obstacle when finding yourself wanting to visit a museum or a private gallery, just as I've previously said. Usually places, particularly private galleries, have a really heavy door like a bank. Entry is operated by a buzzer system, or even more intimidating, there's a guard on the door who lets you in. And for me, particularly when I started coming to things like the National Gallery, because they're so, when I was in London, I went with a group of friends just after I started my masters, and there was maybe 5 or 6 of us, and we had to queue to get in, and then there was a bag scan, but the whole way through the system there were oh my goodness, 7 to 10 security guards throughout the whole process of just even physically getting into the National Gallery in London in Trafalgar Square. And I found it quite really intimidating. But once I was in there, you're completely bowled over by the calibre of art and also how amazing these grand buildings are. And I think it's really important when you're in these situations or you're looking at buildings to remember it is just a building. It's just a building. And when museums and galleries took off in the 18th and 19th century, these buildings, which house amazing art collections, were meant to show their country as leading cultural nations and as a leading cultural institution. So really, these big grand buildings that you'll find, these big grand museums that you'll find all these amazing art collections in, were built to showboat to visitors, essentially, to say, look at how much money we've got, look how much taste and class that we have, that we've got not only a brilliant art collection, but an amazing, top-notch building where it's all kept. These buildings needed to make a grand statement, and that's exactly what they do, and they still do that to this day. But there's another way of looking at things, and this is particularly true when you're going into smaller galleries, and as well as what I said there about the National Gallery, about all the bag checks and things like that. So here's another way to think about it. A door which is difficult to open, or a buzzer system, or a guard. They're not meant to keep people out, but they're meant to keep things in. I'm going to say that again. They're not there to keep you out. They are there to keep things in. Works of art are really high value objects, and these are just security measures to make sure any sticky-fingered visitors who want to take their chances, and having worked in the art world for 12 years, please believe me, this happens far more than it hits the news headlines. For any sticky-fingered visitors, so it's just that they find it a little bit more difficult to get out quickly, because that's what it's all about. It's all about understanding easy access, get in, get out, no blips. But you're less likely to do it if every door has 10 security men that not only one can stop you, but 10 can chase you. And really that's it. So what I would say to that is just take a deep breath and open that door. Ring that buzzer, and also say hello to the guard and ask them how their day is, because I bet you, I always love speaking to security guards when I go to places like the National Gallery, or even just to say hi if I'm visiting somewhere like White Cube, because they're genuinely ignored the whole day, and these guys are there day in, day out. They hear the curators talking, they're there when the shipments come in, when things are being moved around and installed within the gallery spaces. These guys know their stuff. They're not just muscle, they're human beings. They stand there, they listen, they learn. And there's a reason that they're there. They enjoy looking at art, and it's part of their everyday. So just say hi to them. Just say hi. It's also really important to know that people want you to come into these spaces and see the shows that they've worked so hard to put on. Most museums work 5 to 7 years in advance to put on a blockbuster exhibition. 5 years in advance. And it just doesn't make financial sense to only have an elite amount of people that come through the door. Private galleries, I can only really speak of the gallery that I used to work for. We work maybe 2 years in advance with our sort of exhibition schedule, and there is so much planning, logistics, design, curation, security. There are so many things that happen behind the scenes to make an exhibition space look clean and crisp. And we want you to come see this. So if you think about it like that, it just so happens that these amazing things are just kept in very unusual buildings with a little bit added security, which is fair enough. So you should never be intimidated by a building. It's just a building. Reason 2, the people. Now, I could go on about this for a really, really long time. I am from a working class background. Like I said, I never really frequented museums and galleries growing up, and throughout my late teens, even throughout my 20s, I found it really intimidating. And I look back when I first started, when I was working at Pangolin, and when I first started back in 2015, and how I used to just sort of strut into places, and I was very, very oblivious of how important some of these places that I was being allowed into. I actually kind of missed those days because I just naivety. There's a beauty in naivety sometimes where you just sort of stroll in and you don't overthink things. And maybe that's it, actually. I think we all just overthink things. And yeah, so where I'm from, there's nothing more intimidating, I think, for anybody than someone standing in a 3-piece suit, killer high heels, a posh accent, and a whole universe of art vocabulary that you have never heard before in your life. It's no fun for anybody. And even as an art historian, and my goodness, I've been reading and writing about art for 12 years. And actually, last night before recording this, I was actually reading a chapter aloud to my partner. And he passed the comment, and he's an incredibly intelligent guy, and he was saying, is there a reason that there's a need for all these big fancy words that make it really complicated to understand sentences? And I was like, absolutely not. And I've recently been rereading, if anybody, just a small tangent here, I've recently been rereading Lyndon McLaughlin's very important essay that she wrote in the 70s called Why Has There Been No Great Women Artists? And I was reading this 3 weeks ago on the tube, and I was meeting a friend for dinner, and when I got to the restaurant, I was like, I'm just going to read you this little bit here. And it was so complicated, the wording of what she was trying to say, that I was like, this is the problem. It just puts people off. Anyway, the people in the art world. It's hard not to feel intimidated when presented with someone so polished and educated, but you just kind of have to remember, and this is something I still work on day in, day out, working in the art world. They're just another person. They're a human being just like you. And more importantly, and I think this is a really good point if I do say so myself, they're just doing their job, and they probably have their manager or director able to hear their conversations or in earshot. So you just kind of have to keep that in mind. I think something really important to remember is that the vocabulary used in the art world is just industry jargon. That's all it is. It's just industry jargon. It's exactly the same for people that work in marketing or sales or HR or computer software or footballers, rowers, runners, designers, you name it. Every industry has its own set of industry jargon. I've got friends that are in the army, and I cannot believe the amount of army jargon that I just have absolutely no idea what they're saying, but they completely understand it between each other. It's just industry jargon, and the person that you're interacting with is just using theirs. So yeah, okay, some of the words might be a bit strange or a bit complicated, or perhaps they sound like they're a walking, talking thesaurus, but it's just industry jargon. And if you still find it intimidating when you're in these places, particularly if you're in small galleries or even museums, if someone begins talking to you, just politely just let them know that you're just looking and that you're happy to walk around yourselves. And if you have any questions, you'll let them know and they'll quickly leave you alone. And again, they want you to see these spaces. It's brilliant when people interact with you in galleries because it shows that the gallery is engaged and that they're really trying to spread the word that they're not this stuck up space where they don't even register your existence when you walk in. And I have to, well, I name and shame. I have been to several galleries, and it's a gallery that doesn't exist anymore, and it was called Blaine Southern, so I'm going to name and shame them, Blaine Southern. And the people that used to work behind the desk at Blaine Southern in Hanover Square were awful. They were so rude. It was kind of like you were a piece of dirt in their shoe. And even if I was coming in to have business to business related meetings in this space, or to collect a work that we were consigning from them, or dropping off a work that they were consigning from us, the women were just so unimpressed that you had bothered them, and I can't stand that. So I actually think it's a good mark of a gallery when people either stand up or acknowledge that you've come into a space and say hello, ask you if you want any help. But I think naturally, if you're feeling uncomfortable in these spaces, I think just that narrative in your head is them being like, oh my God, I don't belong here. And that's not the case at all. I've never, in all the years that I've worked in a gallery, don't get me wrong, there's some people that have walked in and I've never thought you don't belong here. I've maybe thought, you look a little bit dodgy, so I'm just going to keep a wee eye. But apart from that, I mean, I think that's only really happened a handful of times. But I think it's a good sign when people stand up and acknowledge you and say hello. It makes you, particularly if you've travelled to get to these places. But anyway, long story short, they are just people and they are just using their industry jargon, much like you would at your work. Reason 3, price point. So, let me paint you a picture. You've made it past the door like a bank, you've navigated your way through the sales assistant who's watching you like a hawk, and now you stumble across a work of art that you like. The problem? The price tag is accompanied by the most zeros you've ever seen in your whole life, following a number. And that is a big reason so many people find the art world intimidating, is the price point. And it shouldn't be so. Like, the history of art is made up of stories of record-breaking paintings and sculptures selling for millions and millions of pounds. But whoever started the rumour that in order to be permitted to see high-value objects or beautiful works of art, you need to have deep pockets to match these price tags, because it's nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. And it's so heartbreaking as well, because it's really off-putting. So here's how I think you should think about it. Just because you can't buy something doesn't mean you can't look. And here's the situation I'm going to give you. Think of a shop, or when you go grocery shopping, or you go clothes shopping, or whatever kind of shopping that you like to do. Do you buy something in every single shop you go into on your local high street? The answer is, willing to bet my life on it, no. I'm fairly certain there is no one listening to this that has bought something in every single shop that they've ever been into in the history of their life. Absolutely not. Same question, what about browsing on the internet? Every online store, do you buy something from every online store? Unless, of course, that store is Amazon and you have some late night buying habits. I don't know if anyone else does that, where they'll come back in and they'll buy something from Amazon and then a package will turn up and you'll be like, oh my gosh, what have I ordered? I digress. But think about it like this. Buy everything that you see on the internet or on every shop site that you visit on the internet? Probably not. So just because you aren't buying doesn't mean you don't have a right to look in high street shops or on the internet. It's exactly the same in galleries. It's exactly the same in galleries. Art is for everyone, whether you're looking at it to enjoy it, to teach yourself something, or maybe you're looking to buy it, which is fantastic if you are. You belong in these spaces. So just get out there and explore them. And realistically, if these spaces make you uncomfortable, it's simply just a case of practicing being in them. because I can guarantee you, the more you visit museums, the more you go into little private galleries, the more comfortable you'll be in. When I worked at Pangolin, one of the most heartbreaking questions people always used to ask me is when they would pop their head through the door of the gallery and they'd go, "Oh, I can't afford anything, but can I still come in and look?" And my favourite response that I always said was, "Oh gosh, neither can I, and I work here. Come on in." And that just breaks the ice. And that's what you have to remember. These spaces are there for you to enjoy. And even something like, I even struggle with it, like Sotheby's and Christie's, Bonhams and Phillips, that's the 4 big auction houses. Every time they have a huge sale on, they display the work that they're going to sell. So you can go along and view it. You don't have to buy, of course you don't have to buy. And they put all these exhibitions on for maybe 10 days before a big auction. And you can walk straight up to the door and straight through, and you just say to the person, "Oh, I'm here to see the works for the upcoming auction." And they'll be like, "Oh, okay, no problem, up the stairs, da 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 da." And that's you can just go and have a wander. And that's another way of seeing unbelievable art that's going to disappear into private collections and never be seen again. So I would say that's something as well. And also sometimes in these places they're like, "Do you want a free coffee? Do you want this? Do you want that?" Which is, I mean, amazing. Who doesn't love a free coffee? But anyway, what I would say is, if you're uncomfortable in these places, go with a friend and practice. And even if you just say to the security guard on the door, "Oh, I'm a bit nervous," just address it. "Oh, I'm a bit nervous. Am I allowed in here?" They're never going to say no. They'll never say no. That's not their job. They want you. They're just normal people. They want you to come in, experience these spaces, experience beautiful art, and enjoy it. So I hope I've inspired you to go and see some art. So that is the end of another episode of the Jo's Art History podcast. A little bit different this week. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you some food for thought. If it has, please let me know. You can email me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can get in touch via Instagram, which is at Jo's Art History, JOSARTHISTORY, Jo's Art History, all one word. If you've enjoyed this episode, please feel free to pass it on to someone that you know. And as always, it would be very, very helpful if you have a few minutes and you have enjoyed what you've heard today, if you're able to leave a review, particularly if you're listening on Apple. It just helps other people find the podcast, and it helps us move up the charts as well. As always, I've been Jo McLaughlin, your resident host and art historian, and I look forward to welcoming you next time on the Jo's Art History podcast. Until then, keep learning, and remember, art is for all. See you next time.